Chapter 1. The arrow and the dark. The forest had no mercy for the foolish. And Alara knew she was both foolish and already dying. She pressed her palm against the gash in her side, blood seeping hot and slick between her fingers. The bandits had taken everything: her horse, her provisions, the small leather purse that held what remained of her father's inheritance. They'd left her with nothing but a stolen cloak and the knowledge that no one would come looking for a disgraced magistrate's daughter who'd fled her own engagement scandal. The trees closed in around her. Ancient oaks twisted into cathedral arches that filtered moonlight into silver fragments. She stumbled forward, each step a negotiation with consciousness. Somewhere behind her, wolves howled. Or perhaps they weren't wolves at all. The stories whispered in taverns spoke of worse things that hunted these woods after dark. Alara's boot caught on a root, and she went down hard, the impact driving the air from her lungs. She lay there, cheek pressed to moss and leaf rot, and seriously considered simply staying down. It would be easier, cleaner than whatever death the bandits or wolves or the scream tore through the forest like fabric ripping. She lifted her head, disoriented, pain singing through her ribs. Through the lattice of branches ahead, she saw torchlight, figures moving in formation, the metallic ring of drawn steel. Hunters, a hunting party organized and armed, cutting through the forest with military precision. Hope sparked foolishly in her chest. She opened her mouth to call out, then froze. The torchlight illuminated what they hunted. A man stood in the center of a clearing, utterly still, dressed in black that seemed to drink the light. Even at this distance, even through her fading vision, Alara could see he was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with safety. Sharp features, dark hair that fell past his collar, and eyes even from here, she saw them that reflected the torchlight like a predator's. Surrender, Theron Ashmore, one of the hunters called, voice ringing with authority. By order of House Corvus, you are charged with violating the blood accords. Your execution has been sanctioned. The man Theron didn't move, didn't speak. He simply watched them with that perfect, terrible stillness. Bring down the traitor king, the hunter commanded. 20 crossbows rose as one. Alara didn't think. Thinking was for people who had futures, who had reasons to calculate risk and consequence. She had neither. She had only the bone-deep understanding that she was watching murder dressed as justice. And she'd spent too long being silent while powerful men destroyed what they pleased. She lurched to her feet and ran. Her legs barely held her. Blood loss made the world tilt and swim, but she pushed forward, crashing through undergrowth, closing the impossible distance between herself and the clearing. The hunter's fingers tightened on triggers. Theron's eyes tracked toward her, widening fractionally the first real expression she'd seen on his face. She threw herself between him and the arc of 20 arrows. Time crystallized. She saw the shock ripple through the hunting party, saw Theron move with speed that shouldn't exist, reaching for her, felt the whistle of bolts cutting air. Then she was spinning, the world rotating in a disorienting blur. Strong arms locked around her, impossibly fast, impossibly strong. She registered cold, such profound cold it stole her breath, and the scent of night, blooming flowers and old stone. They hit the ground together. Theron's body curved around hers, shielding her completely. Arrows thudded into earth where they'd been standing. For one suspended heartbeat, there was only silence and the thunder of her pulse in her ears. Foolish, Theron breathed against her hair, and his voice was dark velvet and winter frost. Utterly foolish, mortal girl. Then he was moving again, lifting her as though she weighed nothing, and the world became a nauseating rush of motion. Trees blurred past. The hunters' shouts fell away behind them, swallowed by distance and darkness. Alara tried to speak, to protest, but consciousness was slipping through her fingers like water. She was aware of being carried through the forest at impossible speed, of cold arms that held her with surprising gentleness, of a voice speaking low and rapid in a language she didn't recognize, old words that tasted of ritual and command. Then there was stone beneath her instead of earth, candlelight instead of moonlight, the scent of beeswax and ancient books. Alara opened her eyes to a vaulted ceiling lost in shadows, supported by pillars carved with symbols that seemed to shift when she looked at them directly. She lay on something soft, a chaise upholstered in midnight velvet. Her wounds still bled, staining the fabric. Dark. Theron stood across the room, watching her with those unsettling eyes. In the candlelight, she could see him clearly now, inhumanly beautiful, inhumanly still. And there, when the light caught them right fangs, subtle but unmistakable, pressing against his lower lip, you saved me," he said, and there was something almost like wonder in his voice. "Why?" Alara tried to sit up, failed, fell back against cushions that smelled of cedar and smoke. "It was wrong," she managed. 20 against 1. Execution without trial. I am a vampire girl. Ancient law does not extend me the courtesy of mortal justice. Then ancient law is cruel. Something flickered across his face, surprise. Perhaps, or the memory of surprise from when such expressions had come naturally to him. He crossed the room with that supernatural speed, suddenly kneeling beside her. Up close, he was devastating and terrible, and Alara's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "You're dying," he said flatly. "The bandit's blade was poisoned. I can smell it in your blood." She'd suspected as much. The creeping numbness, the way darkness kept pulling at her vision. "Then I'll die," she said. "Better than what I left behind." His eyes narrowed. "What did you leave behind?" "A marriage I didn't choose. A scandal I didn't create. A family who'd rather see me dead than dishonored." The words came easier than they should have. Perhaps impending death made honesty simple. "I'm no one's loss." Theron stared at her for a long moment, something ancient and unreadable moving behind his eyes. Then he did something she didn't expect. He offered her his wrist. "My blood will purge the poison," he said quietly. "It will heal you, and it will bind you to me not as thrall, not as possession, but as witness. You will be under my protection. The houses cannot touch you without declaring war on me directly." "Why?" Alara whispered. "Why would you do that?" His smile was slight and devastating and sad beyond measure. "Because you are the first person in 300 years to think my life worth saving," he said. "And I am ancient enough to know what that means." Chapter 2. Blood and Bargain. Celara stared at the pale wrist extended before her, at the blue tracery of veins beneath skin that seemed carved from marble. Her vision swam, darkness creeping in from the edges. And she knew with crystalline certainty that she had, perhaps minutes before the poison finished, what the bandits had started. "There are conditions," Theron said, his voice measured and careful in a way that suggested he was choosing each word with deliberate precision. "Rules that govern what I am offering you. I will not take your choice from you, even to save your life. Tell me." The words scraped from her throat, rough and fading. He settled back slightly, though he kept his wrist extended, an offer that remained open. "Vampire blood is powerful. It will heal you, purge the poison, make you stronger than you were. But it creates a bond, not the thrall bond of the dominated, but a blood mark. For 30 days, I will know where you are. I will sense if you're in danger. And you." He paused, something almost like hesitation crossing his features. "You will sense me as well. My moods, my proximity. It fades after the moon turns. But while it lasts, we will not be strangers to each other. And if I refuse, then I will sit with you while you die, and ensure you do not die alone. I have sat vigil before. I know how to make the passing gentle." There was no threat in his words, only ancient weariness and something that might have been grief. Alara's hand trembled against her side, blood still seeping between her fingers. She thought of the life she'd fled, her betrothed's casual cruelty, her stepmother's cold assessment that a living daughter was worth less than a profitable alliance. The locked room where they'd kept her for 3 days before the wedding, as though she were a possession to be stored until needed. She'd thrown herself in front of an arrow, because she'd had nothing left to lose. Now, this creature of shadow and ancient law offered her something she'd never had, a choice made freely, with full knowledge of the cost. "If I accept," she said slowly, "what happens after 30 days? When the bond fades, you will be free to go wherever you wish. I will give you coin enough to start anew, and a letter of safe passage that even the mortal lords will respect. The blood mark protects you while it lasts. No vampire of any house may feed from you or harm you without answering to me directly. After it fades." He met her eyes, and she saw honesty there, stark and uncompromising. "After it fades, you will be unmarked, mortal, vulnerable as any other human walking the night roads, but free. And what do you gain from this bargain?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a question the nobility never thought to ask. "They assumed I took because I could." He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of centuries. "I gained the knowledge that I am still capable of preserving life rather than ending it, that my blood can save as well as curse. It is a small thing perhaps, but not insignificant." The poison sang through her veins, turning her blood to ice and fire. Her breath came shallow and quick. Decision time, her father's voice whispered from memory. In law, hesitation is death. Alara reached for his wrist with her free hand. Then I accept your bargain. Theron Ashmore. He moved with that impossible speed, catching her before she could fall, supporting her against his chest. The cold of him was shocking, like pressing against stone pulled from a winter river. But his hands were gentle as he positioned his wrist against her lips. Bite down, he instructed softly. Or I can open the vein for you. If you, she bit. Her teeth weren't made for it, weren't sharp enough, but desperation gave her strength. His skin parted and blood welled up. Dark and sweet and utterly wrong in a way that her dying body didn't care about at all. It tasted like night itself, like starlight and shadow and the deep earth beneath ancient forests. Like power distilled and concentrated into liquid form. She drank, and it was nothing like the crude wine she'd choked down at her betrothal feast. This was elemental, transformative. Fire raced through her veins, burning away the poison's ice. She gasped against his wrist, overwhelmed. But Theron's other hand came up to cradle the back of her head, holding her steady. Not too much, he murmured. Just enough to heal. I'll tell you when. She felt it working, felt her body knitting itself back together with supernatural speed. The gash in her side closed, tissue regenerating, skin sealing over. The creeping numbness retreated, driven back by liquid warmth that spread from her core to her extremities. Even the smaller cuts and bruises from her flight through the forest faded, leaving unmarked skin behind. Enough, Theron said, and gently but firmly drew his wrist away. Alara fell back against the cushions, gasping, overwhelmed by sensation. Everything was sharper, the candlelight too bright. The sound of her own heartbeat deafening in her ears. The scent of old books and beeswax and something else, something distinctly him, flooding her senses. And beneath it all, she felt him. A presence at the edge of her consciousness, dark and vast and carefully controlled. Like standing at the shore of a midnight ocean and sensing the depth of it, the power of it, held back only by ancient will and iron discipline. The bond, she whispered. The bond, he confirmed. He'd moved away again, putting distance between them. And she understood suddenly that it wasn't rejection, it was courtesy, giving her space to adjust. It will be disorienting for a few hours. Your senses are heightened. You'll feel echoes of my presence until you learn to shield against it. Alara sat up slowly, marveling at the absence of pain. Her dress was still stained with blood, the fabric torn where the bandit's blade had struck, but beneath it her skin was whole, unmarked except for she touched her neck, felt the slight roughness of 2 small punctures. Already healing. I didn't bite your neck, Theron said, following her gaze with an expression she couldn't read. Then what? The blood mark manifests where it chooses. Usually at the throat. It's traditional, and it marks you clearly as under protection. He turned away, moving to a cabinet carved from dark wood. You should rest. The healing takes a toll, even with vampire blood accelerating it. There's a chamber through that door, clean linens, washing water. You're safe here. Where is here? One of my sanctuaries. A way station I maintained when I still traveled freely between territories. His voice carried bitter memory. Before House Corvus decided I was too dangerous to be allowed continued existence, Alara stood, testing her legs, finding them steady and strong. What did you do? To be marked for execution? Theron's hand stilled on the cabinet door. For a long moment, he didn't answer. When he finally turned back to her, his eyes held the weight of ages. I told them no. Chapter 3. Questions in the dark. Alara waited, but Theron didn't elaborate. He turned back to the cabinet, retrieving a crystal decanter filled with dark liquid wine. She assumed, though the color seemed too deep, too richly crimson. You should rest, he said again, not meeting her eyes. I just drank vampire blood and bound myself to an immortal stranger, who's marked for execution by his own kind, Alara replied, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. I don't think I could sleep if I tried. Something flickered across his face, amusement, perhaps, or its ancient echo. Fair enough. He poured the wine into the goblets, offering her one. Though I am not the stranger in this arrangement. You threw yourself in front of arrows for me without even knowing my name. She accepted the goblet, their fingers brushing briefly. Even through the glass, she felt the cold of him, and beneath it, that strange awareness, the bond humming like a plucked string between them. I knew enough. I knew they were going to kill you. Most mortals would consider that justice well served. He moved to the window, a tall Gothic arch that looked out over darkness. Vampires are monsters, after all, predators, killers of men. Are you? She sipped the wine. It was wine, rich and complex and probably worth more than her father's entire estate. A killer of men? I have lived for 347 years, Theron said quietly, still gazing out at the night. I have killed. I have fed. I have done things that would make you flee the sanctuary and take your chances with the poison. He paused. But I have also lived by laws older than mortal kingdoms. Laws that were meant to keep us from becoming the monsters humans fear. Alara crossed to stand beside him, though not too close. Through the window, she saw they were high up a tower, perhaps, overlooking a forest that stretched endlessly in all directions. What laws? He glanced at her, and she saw him weighing something, deciding how much truth she could bear. Finally, he spoke. The blood accords. Written in the first age, when vampires nearly destroyed themselves through excess and warfare. They establish rules how we feed, how we govern, how we interact with mortals and with each other. His voice took on the cadence of recitation, as though he'd memorized the words long ago. We do not feed without consent. We do not turn humans against their will. We do not kill our food source. We maintain the silence mortals may know we exist, but we do not flaunt our nature or our power. And House Corvus thinks you broke these laws? House Corvus thinks I broke something more fundamental. He turned to face her fully. And in the candlelight, she saw the weight he carried, centuries of it, pressing down on shoulders that looked young but had borne burdens longer than her family line had existed. I refuse to take a blood-thrall, Alara frowned. I don't understand. The houses are ruled by bloodlines. Ancient vampires with power consolidated through centuries of careful breeding and political maneuvering. I was a house lord, the Ashmore line. And 30 years ago, when the last of my blood family finally crumbled to dust, House Corvus offered me a bride. He said the word like a curse. A political alliance, Alara said, understanding dawning. She'd lived that particular nightmare herself. A chain, Theron corrected. Dressed in ceremony and contract. The bride they chose was barely turned 20 mortal years when they gave her the dark gift. They expected me to bind her as thrall, to take her will and make her an extension of my power. To strengthen House Corvus through our union. His hands tightened on the goblet. I said no. I released her. Gave her sanctuary and coin and freedom to choose her own path. And they marked you for execution for that? I violated the contract. Worse, I set a precedent that vampires could refuse the bonds the houses demanded. That turned ones weren't property to be traded and bound. His smile was bitter. House Corvus cannot allow that idea to spread. So they declared me rogue, traitor. And they have hunted me for 3 decades. Alara absorbed this, turning it over in her mind. The candlelight cast shadows across his face, making him look both ancient and impossibly young. Where is she now? The vampire you freed? Safe, far from here, living under a name House Corvus will never connect to her. For the first time, something like warmth entered his voice. She sends word occasionally. She's happy, I think. As happy as any of us can be. You gave up everything for her freedom. I gave up a house seat and political standing. He met her eyes. She gave up centuries of servitude. It seemed a fair trade. Alara found herself reassessing everything she'd assumed about the creature before her. Not a monster, or not only a monster. Something more complex, someone who'd paid a devastating price for a principle he wouldn't compromise. Someone not unlike herself, she realized. She'd fled her engagement, knowing it meant losing everything: family, status, security. She'd chosen freedom over safety, even when freedom meant dying in a forest with wolves at her heels. Why tell me this? She asked softly. Theron looked at her for a long moment, and she felt the bond between them pulse with something she couldn't name: recognition. Perhaps, or understanding. Because you asked, he said simply. And because the blood mark binds us for 30 days. You deserve to know what manner of creature you've tied yourself to. A sound echoed from somewhere below, distant but distinct. The creak of old hinges. Footsteps on stone. Theron's entire demeanor changed in an instant. The contemplative philosopher vanished, replaced by a predator in perfect stillness. His hand shot out, gripping her wrist with careful force. Someone's found us, he said, voice barely above a whisper. Get away from the window, now. Alara's heart kicked against her ribs as he pulled her back into the shadows. Through the bond, she felt what he felt: sharp focus. Tactical assessment, and beneath it all, a flicker of something that might have been fear. Not for himself, she realized with shock. For her. The hunters? She whispered. Worse. His eyes had gone completely black, pupils blown wide, every predatory instinct engaged. House Corvus doesn't send hunters twice. They send assassins. He moved her behind him with supernatural speed, positioning himself between her and the chamber door. In the hallway beyond, footsteps drew closer multiple sets, moving with the coordinated precision of trained killers. Theron Ashmore, a voice called from the darkness, cultured and cold. We know the girl is with you. Surrender her, and House Corvus may show you mercy. Theron's laugh was soft and utterly without humor. Tell House Corvus, he said, loud enough to carry. That mercy is a courtesy I no longer extend. The door exploded inward in a shower of splintered wood. Chapter 4. Shadows and steel. 3 vampires poured through the shattered doorway with inhuman speed, spreading out in a flanking pattern that spoke of centuries of combat experience. They wore the silver and black of House Corvus. Their faces beautiful and terrible and utterly without mercy. Theron moved. Alara had never seen anything move like that faster than thought, faster than her heightened senses could track. One moment he stood before her, the next he was across the room, his hand closing around the throat of the nearest assassin. The vampire's eyes widened in shock before Theron threw him bodily through the Gothic window. Glass exploded outward in a glittering cascade. The assassin's scream cut off abruptly somewhere in the darkness below. Run, Theron commanded without looking back at her. The passage behind the bookcase second shelf, red leather binding. Pull it. The remaining 2 assassins circled him like wolves, but their attention kept flickering to Alara. She felt their hunger through the bond not for blood, but for the leverage she represented. A mortal marked by Theron Ashmore. A weakness they could exploit. The girl is blood-marked, the taller assassin said, his voice carrying the musical accent of extreme age. Lord Corvus will pay handsomely for her intact. She could be useful in negotiations. She is under my protection, Theron said, and his voice dropped to something that barely qualified as human, ancient and vast and utterly final. Touch her, and I will show you what the old kings were capable of before your precious houses neutered us with politics and protocol. The assassins attacked as one. Alara stumbled backward, searching frantically along the bookcase. Red leather binding there. She grabbed the book and pulled. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then the entire section of shelving swung inward with a groaning protest of ancient hinges, revealing a dark passageway beyond. Behind her, the chamber erupted into violence. Theron fought with the brutal efficiency of something far older than the House Corvus assassins. He was outnumbered, but he'd clearly spent his long exile preparing for exactly this scenario. He used the environment ruthlessly, throwing one assassin into the stone pillar hard enough to crack both vampire and stone, catching the other's sword strike on a fireplace poker he'd somehow acquired, and redirecting it into the attacker's own shoulder. But they were good, and they were coordinated, and through the bond, Alara felt Theron's awareness splitting half on the fight, half on ensuring she escaped. It was slowing him down. The wounded assassin recovered faster than should be possible, his shoulder already healing. He feinted toward Theron, then broke away at the last second, racing toward Alara with supernatural speed. She didn't think. She grabbed the nearest object, a heavy brass candlestick, and swung. The assassin dodged easily, contempt flashing across his perfect features. But the swing hadn't been meant to hit him. At the apex of her arc, Alara released the candlestick. It flew across the room and struck the remaining oil lamp, shattering it against the wall. Fire bloomed instantly, catching on the old tapestries, the ancient wooden furniture. Spreading with hungry enthusiasm, the assassin jerked back instinctively. Vampires and fire had a primal relationship written into their oldest survival instincts. It gave Theron the opening he needed. He was there in an instant, his hand plunging through the assassin's chest with sickening efficiency. When he withdrew it, he held the creature's heart, still beating sluggishly. The assassin crumbled to ash. The remaining attacker, the tall, ancient one, reassessed the situation with cold calculation. Fire spreading. 2 comrades destroyed. A mortal who fought with unexpected cunning. He inclined his head fractionally. This isn't finished, Ashmore. Lord Corvus will send others. The girl has made herself a target by accepting your mark. Then let Corvus send his entire house, Theron said softly, dangerously. I have eternity to kill them all. The assassin blurred into motion, diving through the broken window into the night beyond. Theron was at Alara's side immediately, his cold hands gripping her shoulders. checking her for injuries with swift, efficient movements. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" "I'm fine," she managed, though her hands were shaking violently. The candlestick lay at her feet where it had fallen. I saw him coming for me, and I thought you thought tactically. Used the environment. Gave me the advantage I needed." His eyes searched her face, and she saw something there she hadn't expected: respect. "Where did you learn to fight?" "I don't know how to fight. She gestured helplessly at the spreading flames. "My father was a magistrate. He taught me that the law isn't about strength. It's about leverage. Finding the weakness in your opponent's position and exploiting it. Your father was a wise man. My father died when I was 12. The words came out flat. My stepmother made sure of that. Subtle poison in his evening wine, night after night, until his heart simply stopped. She ruled through my half-brother after that, and I was useful only for the marriage alliance I could secure." Theron's expression shifted, understanding and something darker moving behind his eyes. "You've been running from monsters far longer than tonight." The fire was spreading faster now, consuming the ancient sanctuary with greedy enthusiasm. Smoke gathered at the ceiling, and Alara felt the heat pressing against her skin. "We need to move," Theron said, already pulling her toward the hidden passage. "This sanctuary is lost, but I have others. We'll go to ground. Let House Corvus think we perished in the flames. Will they believe that? No, but it will buy us time." He paused at the threshold of the passage, looking back at his destroyed sanctuary, 3 centuries of careful collection going up in flames. Books that couldn't be replaced. Artifacts from ages lost to mortal history. His face showed nothing, but through the bond, Alara felt the loss like a physical ache. "I'm sorry," she whispered. If you hadn't intervened in the forest, I would be dead," he interrupted firmly. "House Corvus would have won without raising a blade against me. He gestured at the burning room. This is just property. It can be rebuilt or abandoned. You saved my life, Alara. Everything after that is merely consequence." It was the first time he'd used her name. She realized suddenly that she'd never told it to him. "The bond," he said, reading her expression. "It works both ways. I know your name. You're age 23 mortal years. That you're afraid. But not of me, not anymore. That you're tired of running, but haven't found anywhere worth stopping." His voice softened. "I know you're brave beyond reason, and clever beyond your years, and that you threw yourself in front of arrows because you'd rather die saving a stranger than live in a cage." Alara stared at him. This ancient creature, who saw her more clearly in one night than her own family had into decades. "What else do you know?" she asked quietly. "That you're wondering if the bond lets me read your thoughts. It doesn't, only impressions, emotions, the broad strokes of who you are." He stepped into the passage, pulling her with him. "And that you're terrified you just made a terrible mistake binding yourself to me. I'm not terrified of that." He looked back at her, surprise flickering across his features. "Then what are you afraid of?" Alara glanced back at the burning chamber one last time before answering, "That 30 days won't be enough." Chapter 5. The hidden path passage descended into absolute darkness, the kind that existed before humanity conquered fire. Alara's enhanced senses, still adjusting to the vampire blood in her system, caught fragments: the smell of damp stone, the whisper of air moving through ancient tunnels, the steady drip of water somewhere far below. Theron's hand remained at her elbow, guiding her with certainty through the blackness. He moved as though the dark was no impediment at all, which she supposed it wasn't. Not for him. "How far does this go?" she asked, her voice echoing strangely in the confined space. 3 miles through the mountain, then it opens into a ravine. From there, we'll follow the old riverbed to a safe house I prepared decades ago." His tone was matter-of-fact, but she felt his continued vigilance through the bond, his awareness extending outward, searching for pursuit. "House Corvus will expect me to flee toward the nearest city. They won't anticipate me going deeper into the wilderness. Why keep safe houses at all? Why not just leave these territories entirely?" His hand tightened fractionally on her arm. "Because this is my land. My house held these territories for 2 centuries before Corvus decided to expand their influence. I will not surrender what is mine simply because they've declared me inconvenient." There was steel in his voice, pride that came from centuries of rule. Alara understood it: not surrender, but strategic retreat. The difference between abandoning a position and choosing better ground. "Tell me about House Corvus," she said, as they walked. "Who leads them? What do they want?" "Lord Dante Corvus, turned during the Renaissance, though he claims older lineage than that. Ambitious, ruthless, and skilled at presenting brutality as necessity, Theron's voice carried contempt wrapped in caution. He controls most of the eastern territories now. 5 house lords have sworn fealty to him in the last century. Those who refused were marked for execution, or worse, bound as blood thralls and paraded as examples. The passage narrowed, forcing them to move single file. Theron went first, pulling her after him. Corvus believes the old ways are weakness. He thinks vampires should rule openly, use humans as cattle, abandon the Accords entirely. He's building towards something, a consolidation of power that hasn't been attempted since the Blood Wars. Alara processed this, her mind working through the implications. And you're an obstacle because you represent the old laws. As long as you exist, refusing to bow to him, others might do the same. Precisely, there was approval in his tone. You think like a tactician. I think like someone who watched my stepmother maneuver my father's entire estate into her control using nothing but careful politics and strategic marriages. The words came easier in the dark, as though confession required the absence of eyes. She taught me that power isn't always about strength. Sometimes it's about patience, about making your enemies destroy themselves while appearing blameless. A dangerous education for a mortal woman, an essential one. When you're considered property. They walked in silence for a time, the darkness pressing close. Alara's legs ached. The healing had taken more from her than she'd realized, and adrenaline was fading, leaving exhaustion in its wake. But she pushed forward, unwilling to slow them down, unwilling to be the weakness Theron's enemies assumed she was. Through the bond, she felt him notice her fatigue, felt his concern quickly suppressed, and his calculation how much further she could walk, whether he should simply carry her. The risk versus the delay. I can keep going, she said, before he could speak. I know you can. His voice carried something that might have been admiration. But there's no shame in accepting help when it's offered. I've spent my entire life being carried, metaphorically speaking. Carried through decisions I didn't make, through a life I didn't choose, toward a future that was never mine. She stumbled slightly on loose stone, caught herself. I'd like to walk under my own power for once. He didn't argue. But she felt his readiness through the bond. If she fell, he would catch her before she hit the ground. They continued in companionable silence, and Alara found herself thinking about the strange intimacy of the bond. It wasn't intrusive. Exactly, he couldn't read her specific thoughts, couldn't pluck memories from her mind. But he knew the shape of her, the emotional landscape she inhabited, fear and determination, grief and stubborn hope. The quiet anger she'd carried for so long she'd almost forgotten it was there, and she knew him in return. Ancient weariness, loneliness so profound it had its own gravity, pride that wouldn't bend even when bending would ensure survival. And underneath everything, carefully hidden but presented desperate, fragile hope that perhaps he wasn't the monster centuries of isolation had convinced him he'd become. The bond is strange, she said softly, knowing someone without knowing them. It's a pale shadow of what blood thralls experience, Theron replied. They have no barriers, no privacy of thought. Every impulse, every fear, every desire, laid bare to their master. This, he gestured vaguely at the space between them, this is merely awareness, enough to protect and be protected, but not enough to possess. Is that why you refuse to take one? Because of what it would do to them? Partly. The passage began to slope upward, the air growing fresher. But also because I remember what it was like to be young, newly turned, struggling to hold on to humanity while the hunger tried to strip it away. His voice went distant, remembering. My sire was cruel. She took thralls for entertainment, broke their minds for sport. When I finally escaped her, I swore I would never do to another what she did to me. Alara absorbed this revelation, adding it to her growing understanding of the creature beside her. Not born to monstrosity, but shaped by it. Choosing, consciously and at great cost, to be something different. How did you escape her? I waited, simple words carrying decades of patient planning. Watched, learned, and when she finally grew careless, when she believed I was properly broken to her will, I took her heart and scattered her ashes in running water. It's one of the few ways to ensure a vampire stays dead. Do you regret it? Only that I didn't act sooner. No hesitation, no doubt. She created me to be her plaything, her possession. I chose to be free instead. The cost was hers to pay. The passage opened suddenly into a wider cavern. Moonlight filtered through a crack in the stone ceiling high above, painting everything in silver and shadow. Water pooled in the center, fed by a thin stream that vanished into darkness at the far end. Theron paused, checking their surroundings with predatory thoroughness. Satisfied, he turned to Alara. We can rest here briefly. The safe house is another hour's walk, but you need to recover your strength. Alara wanted to argue, wanted to prove she could continue without rest, but her legs were trembling. And the cavern's beauty, wild and untouched and utterly unlike anything in her previous life, called to something deep in her chest. Just a few minutes, she conceded. She moved to the water's edge, knelt, and cupped her hands to drink. The water was shockingly cold, clean and sharp with minerals. When she looked up, she found Theron watching her with an expression she couldn't read. What? She asked. You continue to surprise me, he said quietly. Most mortals I've known would be catatonic by now. Attack, fire, flight through darkness, you take it all in stride. I'm terrified, she admitted. I'm just also very good at functioning while terrified. Survival skill learned young. He moved closer, settling onto a smooth stone across from her. In the moonlight, he looked carved from marble, beautiful and remote and ancient beyond measure. Why did you really save me? The question hung between them, sharp with genuine curiosity. In the forest. You must have known what I was. Must have understood the danger. Alara considered lying, offering some noble justification. But the bond made deception feel hollow. Because I was so tired of watching the powerful destroy what they pleased, she said finally. And because dying to save a life felt better than dying for nothing at all. And now, do you regret the choice? She thought about the burning sanctuary, the assassins, the blood mark on her throat that bound her to a fugitive vampire lord. Thought about the life she'd left behind, the loveless marriage, the stepmother's calculated cruelty, the slow suffocation of being treated as property. No, she said, and meant it. I don't regret it at all. Something shifted in his expression, walls coming down, just slightly. Just enough. Good, Theron said softly. Neither do I. Chapter 6. Sanctuary in Stoneath's safe house was not what Alara expected. She'd anticipated something crude, a cave, perhaps, or a rough stone shelter hidden in the wilderness. Instead, Theron led her to what appeared to be the ruins of an ancient monastery, half consumed by the forest, its Gothic arches rising from a carpet of moss and fallen leaves, like the bones of some massive creature. Welcome to St. Mordra's, Theron said, pushing through a doorway whose door had rotted away centuries ago. Abandoned during the plague years. The monks believed the isolation would save them from infection. It didn't. Inside, the decay was less pronounced. Someone, Theron, she assumed, had made careful preparations. The main hall had been cleared of debris, the stone floor swept clean. Candles waited in iron sconces, and in the corner sat a trunk that looked suspiciously well maintained for a centuries-old ruin. Theron moved through the space with practiced efficiency, lighting candles with a flint he produced from somewhere in his dark coat. Warm light bloomed, pushing back the shadows, revealing faded frescoes on the walls, saints and angels rendered in styles that predated the Renaissance. There's a well in the courtyard with clean water, he said, opening the trunk to reveal carefully folded blankets, sealed containers of what looked like preserved food, and several changes of clothing. Basic provisions. Enough for a mortal to survive comfortably for several weeks. You planned for this. It wasn't a question. I planned for many scenarios. He pulled out a thick wool blanket, offering it to her. When you're hunted for 3 decades, you learn that paranoia is simply preparation by another name. Alara accepted the blanket, wrapping it around her shoulders. The night had grown cold, and despite the healing properties of his blood, she still felt mortal vulnerabilities: cold, hunger, exhaustion. How many of these places do you have? Enough. Evasive, but not dismissive. Scattered across territories I once controlled. Most have been compromised over the years, but House Corvus doesn't know about this one. The monks kept excellent records, and none of them mentioned the catacombs beneath the monastery. Catacombs? He gestured to a dark opening, partially hidden behind a fallen column, where the monks buried their dead during the plague. Dozens of chambers, multiple exits. If Corvus finds us here, we'll have warning and escape routes. His expression hardened. I won't be trapped again. There was history in those words, pain and fury carefully locked away. Through the bond, Alara felt echoes of it. Confinement, chains, his sire's laughter as she demonstrated that immortality meant torture could last forever. You were imprisoned, she said softly, by the one who turned you. Theron's shoulders tensed. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer, that she'd pushed too far into wounds that hadn't healed despite centuries passing. Then he spoke, his voice carefully neutral. For 47 years, she kept me in silver chains painful for vampires, inhibits our healing, fed me barely enough to survive, broke me down systematically until I forgot what it was like to be anything but hers. He moved to the window, an empty stone arch that looked out over the moonlit forest. When I finally escaped, I swore I would never be caged again. Not by chains, not by houses, not by anyone's will but my own. Alara set the blanket aside and crossed to stand beside him, maintaining careful distance, but offering presence. Is that why you help turn vampires escape their houses? Because you remember what it feels like? Yes. Simple. Honest. The bride Corvus wanted me to take. Celeste was her name. Reminded me of myself. Young, terrified, trying desperately to hold on to who she'd been before the turning. I looked at her and saw my own face in chains. His hands gripped the stone windowsill hard enough that small cracks appeared in the ancient rock. I couldn't do it. Couldn't bind her to me. Couldn't take what was left of her autonomy and crush it into servitude. So you freed her, knowing what it would cost. The cost to me was nothing compared to the cost to her if I'd complied. He released the windowsill, turning to face her fully. House Corvus called it sentimentality, weakness. They couldn't understand that some things matter more than political advantage. Alara studied his face in the candlelight, the sharp features, the dark eyes that held too much history, the mouth set in lines carved by centuries of solitude. Freedom, she said. Freedom matters more, yes. His gaze locked with hers, and the bond between them pulsed with recognition to people who'd both paid everything for the right to choose their own paths. You understand. That's rare. I understand because I lived it. Different chains, same cage. She thought of her stepmother's locked room, her betrothed's casual assumption of ownership, the wedding dress hanging in her chamber like a funeral shroud. They told me I was ungrateful, that I didn't appreciate the advantageous match they'd arranged, that a woman of my station should be honored to marry a lord's third son, never mind that he'd already buried 2 wives under suspicious circumstances. Theron's expression darkened. What was his name? Why? Because if we survived the next few weeks, I might pay him a visit. There was no humor in his tone. Ensure he doesn't acquire a third wife to bury. Something warm and dangerous unfurled in Alar's chest, not fear, but satisfaction. Here was someone who believed her without question, who saw her stepmother's machinations for what they were, who offered casual violence on her behalf, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Lord Edmund Blackthorn, she said. Of the Blackthorn holdings in the northern provinces. Noted. Theron moved away from the window, gesturing to the blankets. You should rest. Dawn is 3 hours away, and I need to secure the perimeter before I sleep. You sleep during the day? Daylight doesn't destroy us, that's mortal mythology, but it weakens us significantly. Makes us vulnerable. Most vampires sleep during the day by necessity, if not preference. He paused. I'll be in the catacombs below. Safer there. But you'll feel me through the bond if you need me. Alara settled onto the makeshift pallet he'd prepared, pulling the blankets around herself. The exhaustion she'd been fighting finally crashed over her like a wave. Theron? He stopped at the threshold of the darkened stairway. Yes? Thank you. For telling me about your sire. About Celeste. For trusting me with the truth. He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried something she hadn't heard before. Vulnerability, carefully offered. The bond makes lies difficult, but it doesn't compel truth. I choose to tell you these things, Alara, because you asked. Because you listened without judgment. Because in one night, you've shown me more genuine understanding than I've received in 30 years of exile. I'm glad, she said softly, that you're not alone anymore. Even if it's just for 30 days. Through the bond, she felt his reaction, surprise and warmth, and something deeper, more complex. A door opening after being locked for decades. So am I, he said finally. Sleep. I'll keep watch. He descended into darkness, his footsteps fading to silence. Alara lay in the candlelit monastery, listening to the wind whisper through broken stone, and felt the steady presence of him beneath her awareness, vigilant, protective. No longer quite so alone. She closed her eyes and let exhaustion pull her under. Her last conscious thought was that the bond hummed between them like a promise. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel afraid of what tomorrow might bring. Outside, in the forest beyond the monastery walls, something moved through the shadows, watching, waiting, and in the catacombs below. Theron's eyes snapped open, every predatory instinct screaming warning. They'd been found. Chapter 7. Blood and Angela awoke to Theron's hand over her mouth, and his voice, barely a whisper, in her ear. Don't scream. Don't move. They're here. The bond flooded with his urgency-controlled panic, tactical assessment, the predator's awareness of being cornered. She nodded against his palm, and he removed it slowly, trusting her to stay silent. Through the broken windows, she saw the sky had lightened to the deep blue of pre-dawn. Not quite daylight, but close enough that Theron's movements seemed fractionally slower, his supernatural grace edged with the first hints of lethargy. How many? She breathed. 6. Maybe 7. Surrounding the monastery, his eyes were completely black, pupils dilated for night vision. They're being cautious this time, waiting for full dawn when I'm weakest. Can we reach the catacombs? They'll expect that. They'll have the exits covered. He pulled her to her feet, pressing a long knife into her hand's silver blade, worn leather grip. This is iron and steel, not silver. Won't permanently kill a vampire, but it'll slow them down. Aim for the heart or throat. Alar's hands closed around the knife, its weight both terrifying and reassuring. I don't know how to fight. You know how to survive. That's more important. He moved to the trunk, pulling out items with swift efficiency. Another blade for himself, a coil of rope, a small vial of clear liquid. The bond will help. You'll feel when they're close, sense their intent. Trust your instincts. A sound echoed from the courtyard, stone scraping against stone. Footsteps, no longer bothering with stealth. Theron Ashmore. The voice that called out was different from the assassins at the tower, older, carrying authority that came from centuries of command. I am Marcus Vex, first blade of House Corvus. Lord Dante sends his regards and a final offer. Theron's expression hardened to granite. Vex. Of course Corvus would send his attack dog. You know him? We were friends once. Before he sold his honor to Corvus for a seat at the table of power, bitterness leaked through the bond, sharp and acidic. He's killed more rogue vampires than anyone else in the Eastern Territories. Very efficient. Very thorough. Surrender the girl, Marcus called, closer now. She's mortal, Ashmore. She has no place in our wars. Give her to us, swear fealty to Lord Corvus, and your sentence will be commuted to a century of service. You'll live, as a thrall, Theron said quietly, for Alar's ears only. Bound and broken. He's not offering mercy, he's offering a different kind of death. Alar's grip tightened on the knife. What do? We fight. He met her eyes, and she saw the weight of the decision in his gaze. But I need you to understand something. If they take you alive, they'll use you against me, torture you to force my compliance. And if I fall, he pressed the small vial into her free hand. Drink this. It's quick, painless, better than what Corvus would do to you. She stared at the vial poison. She understood now. A mercy, offered with terrible pragmatism. No, she said firmly. Alar, no. She tucked the vial into her bodice but met his gaze with steel in her own. I didn't survive my stepmother's schemes and flee an arranged marriage and throw myself in front of arrows just to poison myself when things get difficult. We fight, Theron, both of us. And if we fall fighting. Something blazed in his eyes, pride and terror and fierce, desperate hope. You're extraordinary, he said softly. And I'm going to get you killed, probably. She smiled, sharp and wild. But at least I'll die free. The monastery's main door exploded inward. Marcus Vex stepped through the wreckage, and Alara understood immediately why Theron spoke of him with such wariness. He was older than any vampire she'd encountered, centuries written in his perfect, ageless face. He wore House Corvus black-like armor, and the sword at his side had the look of something that had drunk deeply and often. 5 more vampires filed in behind him, forming a semicircle that cut off escape, still theatrical. I see, Theron said, positioning himself between Alara and the attackers. Some things never change, Marcus, and you're still choosing lost causes over common sense. Marcus's gaze flickered to Alara, assessing and dismissing in a single glance. She's lovely, I'll grant you, but hardly worth dying for. You've always had a weakness for broken birds. She's not broken. She's stronger than you could comprehend. Theron's voice dropped to something ancient and dangerous. And she's under my protection. The accords are clear. The accords don't apply to rogues. Marcus drew his sword with liquid grace. You forfeited their protection when you defied House Corvus. Now you're simply a problem to be eliminated. Then eliminate me. Let the girl go. Can't do that, old friend. She's seen too much, knows too much. And Lord Corvus is curious about a mortal bold enough to take a vampire's blood mark. His smile was beautiful and terrible. He thinks she might be useful, persuadable. Through the bond, Alara felt Theron's rage spike white hot and barely controlled. This was his nightmare. Watching someone under his protection tortured, broken, used as leverage against him. She stepped forward, putting herself beside Theron rather than behind him. I'm not persuadable, she said clearly. And I'm not going anywhere with you. Marcus laughed, genuinely amused. Spirit. I like that. It'll make the breaking more satisfying. He moved, even expecting supernatural speed. Alara barely tracked it. Marcus closed the distance in a blur, his sword sweeping toward Theron's throat. Theron parried with his own blade, steel screaming against steel. And the impact sent shockwaves through the stone floor. The other vampires surged forward as one. Theron fought like something carved from violence and fury. His movements economical and devastatingly efficient. He'd spent decades preparing for this, fighting multiple opponents, compensating for daylight weakness, protecting a mortal in close quarters combat. But they were many, and he was one, and dawn crept closer with every passing moment. One vampire broke through his defense, lunging for Alara. She didn't freeze, didn't hesitate. She dropped low, using the assassin's momentum against him, and drove her knife upward with all her strength. The blade punched through his ribs, found the heart beneath. The vampire's eyes widened in shock before he staggered backward, wounded, but not destroyed. It gave Theron the opening he needed. His hand closed on the vampire's throat, and with a savage twist, he separated head from body. The corpse crumbled to ash. Good, Theron gasped, already turning to face the next attacker. Just like that. Heart or head, nothing else matters. Alara's hands shook violently, adrenaline screaming through her veins. She'd just killed something. Someone. The knife was slick with dark blood that smoked faintly in the growing light. No time to process. No time to feel. Another vampire came at her from the left. She threw herself sideways, rolled, came up with the knife extended. The movement was pure instinct. Guided by the bond, she felt Theron's awareness of the battlefield, his tactical mind processing threats and opportunities. And somehow that knowledge bled through to her, helping her move before conscious thought could slow her down. The vampire grabbed her wrist, crushing it with casual cruelty. The knife clattered to the floor. He smiled, fangs extending, and yanked her toward him. Alara's free hand found the vial in her bodice. She pulled it free and smashed it into the vampire's face. Not poison, she'd lied to Theron about that. Holy water, stolen from the monastery's ancient font. Probably powerless, probably just water blessed by long-dead monks. But the vampire screamed and released her, clawing at his burning face. And Alara grabbed her knife and drove it through his throat. Marcus and Theron fought in a deadly dance at the center of the hall, evenly matched despite the approaching dawn. Around them, 3 more vampires closed in, coordinating their attacks with practiced precision. Through the bond, Alara felt Theron's exhaustion bleeding through his control. He was strong, skilled, ancient, but he was outnumbered and weakening with every moment of gathering light. They were going to lose, unless she did something desperate. Alara ran for the eastern wall, where the largest window gapped open to the lightening sky. She grabbed a fallen timber old wood, dry and brittle, and swung it with all her strength at the remaining frescoed panels. Shattering centuries-old glass, dawn light poured through the opening like liquid gold. Every vampire in the room recoiled, hissing in pain and fury. Even Theron staggered, his movements suddenly sluggish and uncoordinated. But Marcus's vampires were worse, younger, less accustomed to fighting through daylight's weakness. They fell back toward the shadows, disoriented and vulnerable. Theron didn't waste the advantage. He moved through them like death itself, exploiting their confusion, his blade finding hearts and throats with surgical precision. 2 more fell to ash. Marcus himself retreated, recognition dawning in his ancient eyes. Clever girl, he said, though blood leaked from burns where daylight had touched him. But this isn't over, Ashmore. Corvus will send others. He'll send armies if he must. Let him. Theron's voice was raw with exhaustion and triumph. I'll kill them all. Marcus and his 2 remaining companions fled into the shadows, disappearing into the forest beyond. Silence fell, broken only by Alara and Theron's ragged breathing. They'd won, for now. Chapter 8. wounds and whisper. Celera's legs gave out. She didn't feel herself falling until Theron caught her. His arms locked around her waist, lowering her gently to the stone floor. The knife slipped from her nerveless fingers, clattering away into darkness. I killed them, she whispered, staring at her hands still stained with blood that was already turning to ash. I actually killed them. You defended yourself. You defended me. Theron knelt beside her, his face drawn with exhaustion, burns already healing, but slowly the daylight had taken more from him than he'd admit. You were magnificent. I was terrified. Terror and courage aren't opposites. They're companions. He brushed ash from her cheek with surprising gentleness. The bond helped, didn't it? You felt the fight before it reached you. She nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. The adrenaline was crashing now, leaving her shaking and hollow. She'd never taken a life before, had never imagined herself capable of it. And yet, when the moment came, she hadn't hesitated, hadn't frozen, because through the bond, she'd felt Theron's absolute certainty that she would survive this. His faith in her had become her own. The holy water, Theron said, a note of wonder in his voice. Where did you find it? The font near the entrance. I grabbed it before we rested, just in case. She met his eyes. I lied about the vial being poison. I'm sorry. I needed something, anything that might help. His expression softened into something she'd never seen before, pure, unguarded affection. You prepared. You planned. You used the environment against superior force. He laughed, the sound rough but genuine. You fight like someone trained in warfare, not a magistrate's daughter fleeing scandal. My father taught me that survival requires preparation and the willingness to use whatever tools you have. Her voice steadied slightly. I listened. Theron stood slowly, grimacing as movement pulled at wounds that hadn't fully closed. His blood, dark as wine, stained his shirt in multiple places. A deep gash across his ribs. A puncture wound in his shoulder. Lesser cuts that would have killed a mortal. You're hurt, Elara said, forcing herself upright despite her trembling legs. I'll heal. Give me a few hours in complete darkness, and I'll be nearly restored. But the way he favored his left side suggested the injuries were worse than he claimed. We can't stay here. Marcus will return with reinforcements. We have perhaps 2 hours. Before he swayed suddenly, catching himself against the wall. Through the bond, Elara felt it, not just exhaustion, but something deeper, depletion. He'd given her his blood to save her from poison, then fought multiple vampires while weakened by approaching dawn. He was running on nothing but will. You need blood, she said quietly. His eyes snapped to hers, and for the first time since they'd met, she saw hunger there, raw and barely controlled. No, I can hunt later. Find an animal in the forest, something sufficient to. How long will hunting take? How much energy will you expend tracking and killing when you're already this weak? She moved toward him deliberately. Marcus said he'll return with reinforcements. We don't have time for you to hunt, Elara. You won't take without consent. I know. She pulled aside the collar of her dress, exposing the blood mark at her throat, 2 small punctures already healed but still visible. I'm giving consent, freely, because we need you strong, and because. She hesitated, then spoke the truth. Because I trust you. Theron went utterly still, every predatory instinct focused on the pulse point she'd exposed. Through the bond, she felt his war with himself, hunger against honor, need against refusal. 300 years of discipline against the primal drive that defined what he was. You don't understand what you're offering, he said, voice strained. Feeding creates intimacy. Not like the bond, deeper, more visceral. You'll feel what I feel. Experience what I experience. He broke off, struggling for words. It's not something done casually. Nothing about this is casual. Elara stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the supernatural cold radiating from him. You saved my life. I saved yours. We've fought side by side, bled together, trusted each other with truths we've told no one else. If that's not intimacy, I don't know what is. His control was fracturing. She could see it in the tension of his jaw, the way his hands had curled into fists. The hunger was winning, inch by terrible inch. If I hurt you, you won't. Absolute certainty. You've spent 3 centuries learning control. You freed a vampire rather than bind her. You offered me poison so I wouldn't suffer if you fell. She reached up, cupping his face with one hand, cold as winter stone, but she didn't flinch. You're the least dangerous monster I've ever known, Theron Ashmore. Something broke in his expression, the last wall crumbling. Tell me yes, he whispered. Say the words. Make it explicit. Yes, Elara said clearly. Feed from me. Take what you need. He moved with that supernatural speed, but gentler than she'd imagined possible. One hand cradled the back of her head, supporting her. The other gripped her waist, holding her steady. His breath cool and smelling faintly of night-blooming flowers ghosted across her throat. This will hurt at first, he warned. Then it won't. Then it will feel. He paused. Different. She felt his fangs press against her skin, sharp points of pressure. Felt the bond between them suddenly blaze with anticipation and need and something achingly tender. Then he bit down, pain bright and sharp, like bee stings concentrated at her throat. Elara gasped, her hands flying up to grip his shoulders. And through the bond she felt his immediate concern. His readiness to stop if she asked. She didn't ask. The pain faded quickly, replaced by warmth that spread from the bite like wine through water. And with it came sensation. She had no context for his pleasure at the taste of her, rich and complex and utterly consuming. His relief as strength flowed back into depleted reserves. His wonder that she was allowing this, trusting him with something so profoundly intimate, and underneath it all, bleeding through the bond with devastating clarity, his absolute determination to protect her, to keep her safe, to ensure that what they were building between them, this strange, fierce partnership, survived whatever House Corvus threw at them. She'd thought the bond made them close. This shattered any remaining distance. She felt his heartbeat slow and strong. Nothing like a mortal's frantic rhythm. Felt centuries of loneliness receding, just slightly, just enough. Felt his carefully buried hope that perhaps he'd found something worth protecting more than his own pride. Time lost meaning. She floated in the sensation, held safe in his arms, experiencing herself through his senses, brave and bright and more precious than anything he'd encountered in 300 years of existence. Finally, gently, he withdrew. His tongue swept across the puncture wounds once, twice, and she felt them seal beneath the touch, healing instantly. When he pulled back to look at her, his eyes had returned to their normal state, no longer consumed by hunger. Are you all right? His voice was rough with emotion. Elara nodded, dizzy and warm and somehow fundamentally changed. That was intense, he supplied. Overwhelming. I should have warned you more clearly, beautiful, she finished quietly. He stared at her, thunderstruck. I felt you, she continued, words spilling out before she could second-guess them. Not just surface thoughts but deeper. Your loneliness, your hope, the way you see me. She touched the healed marks at her throat, still tingling with phantom sensation. No one has ever seen me like that. Like I matter. Like I'm worth protecting for my own sake, not for what I represent or what I can provide. Theron's hand came up to cup her cheek, mirroring her earlier gesture. You matter more than you know. More than perhaps I should allow, given that we have 26 days left before the bond fades and you're free of me. What if I don't want to be free of you? The words hung between them, dangerous, impossible, utterly sincere. Before Theron could respond, a sound echoed from the forest beyond, distant but unmistakable. Hoofbeats, many of them. Approaching fast, Marcus had returned, and he'd brought an army. Chapter 9. The choice between worlds. Theron moved with renewed strength, the effects of feeding already evident in his fluid movements. He pulled Elara toward the darkened stairwell leading to the catacombs, his hand firm around hers. How many? She asked, listening to the thunder of approaching horses. 20. Maybe more. His jaw set in grim determination. Marcus wasn't bluffing. Corvus sent a war party. They descended into darkness so complete it pressed against Elara's enhanced senses. The catacombs smelled of old bones and stagnant water, the air thick with centuries of undisturbed decay. Theron, navigated by memory and supernatural sight, guiding her through twisting passages lined with burial niches. There's an exit that opens into the river gorge, he said, his voice low and urgent. From there we can follow the water downstream, lose them in the current. They'll expect us to run deeper into the forest, not towards civilization. And then what? Elara's free hand trailed along the damp stone wall, keeping her oriented in the absolute dark. We can't run forever. Eventually they'll corner us, and next time we might not. I know. Pain bled through the bond, not physical, but the deeper ache of impossible choices. I've been thinking about that. About what comes after survival. They emerged into a larger chamber, and Theron paused long enough to light a torch from the supplies he'd stashed there. Flickering orange light revealed rows of stone shelves holding ancient remains. Monks who'd sought isolation in life and found it eternally in death. There's a place, Theron said quietly, not meeting her eyes. Far north, beyond House Corvus's territories. Neutral ground, held by vampires who rejected the house system entirely. They call it Haven. It's where I sent Celeste. You could go there. Be safe. We could go there. He finally looked at her, and the torchlight caught the conflict written across his features. But it would mean leaving everything. The territories I've held for centuries. Any hope of reclaiming my house seat. My identity as Ashmore, as a lord who stood against Corvus. Through the bond, Alara felt the weight of what he was offering and what it would cost him. Not just pride, but purpose. He defined himself by resistance, by refusing to bow to tyranny. Fleeing to Haven would mean admitting defeat. Is that what you want? She asked carefully. To run? What I want, he broke off as shouts echoed from above. The war party had reached the monastery. What I want doesn't matter. You're mortal, Alara. Fragile, vulnerable. Every moment you spend with me puts you in danger. The responsible thing, the right thing, would be to get you to safety. And then what? Surrender yourself to Corvus so he stops hunting? She stepped closer, forcing him to look at her. Become his thrall after all. Die fighting a war you can't win alone? Better me than you. That's not your choice to make. Her voice hardened with the same steel that had carried her through her stepmother's manipulations. Through her escape, through watching vampires crumble to ash beneath her knife. You keep trying to protect me by making decisions for me. That's not protection, that's just another cage with better intentions. Theron flinched as though struck. I'm not trying to cage you. Then stop treating me like I'm too fragile to choose my own risks. She gripped his arm, making him feel the strength in her hands. Mortal strength, yes, but strength nonetheless. I stayed. I fought. I offered you my blood, knowing full well what it meant. At every turn, I've chosen this. Chosen you. Stop trying to take that choice away from me. He stared at her, something like wonder and grief warring in his expression. You don't understand what you're choosing. A life on the run, hunted by one of the most powerful houses in existence. No safety, no stability, no future beyond survival. I understand perfectly. She smiled, sharp and fierce. It's still better than the future I left behind. At least this cage I'm choosing to walk into. At least this monster asked for my consent. A crash echoed from above, the war party breaching the monastery's defenses, searching for the entrance to the catacombs. They had minutes at most. We need to move, Theron said, but he didn't move, still caught in the gravity of her words. Tell me honestly, Alara demanded. If I wasn't here, if you didn't have to worry about protecting a mortal, what would you do? Run to Haven? Or stand and fight? His answer came without hesitation. Fight. Corvus has gotten away with tyranny for too long. Someone needs to stand against him. Show the other houses that his power isn't absolute. Dark fire kindled in his eyes. I'd make him bleed for every inch of territory. Rally the vampires he's oppressed. Build a coalition strong enough to challenge his rule. Then do that. And let me fight beside you. You'll die, probably. She echoed her earlier words, and his slight, shocked smile told her he remembered. But I'd rather die fighting for something that matters than live safely in a world where monsters like Corvus and Edmund Blackthorn and my stepmother get to destroy lives without consequence. Footsteps thundered overhead. Voices calling orders, coordinating search patterns. Wood splintering as they tore through the monastery looking for the catacomb entrance. Theron pulled her into motion at last, moving swiftly through the darkness toward the exit. But his mind was racing. She felt it through the bond. Tactical calculations shifting, plans reforming around this new variable. Not protecting her by hiding her away, but incorporating her into the strategy as an ally rather than a liability. If we do this, he said, as they ran. If we truly fight rather than flee, I need you to understand the stakes. Corvus will come for you specifically. Use you against me. Make you suffer to break my will. He can try. Alara's voice was steady despite her pounding heart. I survived my stepmother's poison and my betrothed's intentions. I think I can survive a vampire who underestimates me because I'm mortal. They reached a narrow fissure in the catacomb wall, barely wide enough to squeeze through. Beyond it, Alara heard rushing water, the river gorge Theron had mentioned. Escape. Temporary safety. But before they could slip through, a voice rang out behind them. Not Marcus this time, but someone else. Someone whose voice carried the weight of absolute authority, Theron Ashmore. How disappointing to find you scurrying through tombs like a common rat. They turned as one. A figure stood silhouetted against torchlight at the far end of the chamber, tall, perfectly composed, dressed in crimson and black that marked him as nobility even in the uncertain light. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge, ancient and overwhelming. Through the bond, Alara felt Theron's recognition and his ice-cold dread. Lord Dante Corvus, Theron said quietly. How kind of you to join the hunt personally. Corvus stepped forward, and Alara saw him clearly for the first time. Beautiful in the way all ancient vampires were beautiful, perfect features unmarked by time, dark hair that fell in calculated disorder, eyes that held the weight of centuries. But there was something else there too, something that made her skin crawl. A casual cruelty. The certainty of someone who'd never been denied anything he wanted. I don't usually involve myself in exterminating rogues, Corvus said, his voice smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. But you've been irritatingly persistent, old friend. And now you've acquired something I find intriguing. His gaze locked on Alara, a mortal brave enough to take your blood mark. A woman who throws herself in front of arrows, who fights vampires with holy water and stolen knives. He smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing Alara had ever seen. Tell me, little bird, what makes you so willing to die for a doomed cause? Alara lifted her chin, refusing to show the fear singing through her veins. The same thing that makes you so afraid of him. He reminds you that power isn't the same as right, that some things are worth more than survival. Corvus's smile widened. Oh, I like her, Theron. I like her very much. He gestured, and 20 vampires materialized from the shadows, surrounding them completely. Which is why I'm going to make you both an offer. One chance to survive this with all your pieces intact. I'm listening, Theron said carefully. Swear fealty to House Corvus. Both of you. You become my first lieutenant. Marcus has grown complacent, and I think you'd prove far more entertaining. And your little mortal. Corvus's eyes raked over Alara with calculating interest. I'll turn her, make her immortal, strong enough to stand at your side for eternity rather than die in the next skirmish. Through the bond, Alara felt Theron's revulsion at the offer and his terrible, aching temptation. Not for himself, but for her. The chance to save her from mortality's fragility, to protect her forever. What do you say, Theron? Corvus pressed. Your pride and principles or her life. Choose carefully. This offer expires when my patience does. Theron's hand tightened on Alara's, and she felt him teetering on the edge of a decision that would define everything that came after. She squeezed back, sending certainty through the bond. She'd already made her choice. Now he had to make his. Chapter 10. Blood Oaths and New Beginnings. Silence stretched taut as bowstring. 20 vampires waiting for Theron's answer. Corvus watching with the patient hunger of a predator certain of its kill. Alara felt Theron's conflict through the bond, the desperate want to save her warring with everything he'd fought for across 3 decades of exile. She understood the temptation, immortality, power, safety, purchased with surrender. But she'd lived that bargain before, in a different form. Her stepmother's bargain, security for silence. Her betrothed's bargain, status for submission. Every cage came with promises of protection. No, Theron said quietly. Corvus's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. No, to which part? The fealty or the immortality? Both. Theron's voice strengthened, centuries of nobility rising to the surface. I will not bend knee to a tyrant, and I will not take her choice by turning her without consent. Those are the principles that cost me everything. I won't abandon them now to save my life. How noble. How stupid. Corvus's smile sharpened to something cruel. And you, little bird? You agree with this suicidal devotion to principle? You'd rather die mortal in some pathetic last stand than live forever at his side? All eyes turned to Alara. Through the bond, she felt Theron's silent plea, not for her to agree with him, but for her to choose honestly, whatever that choice might be. He would honor her decision even if it meant losing her. That faith, that trust, made her answer easy. I'd rather choose my own fate than have you choose it for me, Alara said clearly. And I choose to stand with someone who values my freedom over my obedience. So yes, Lord Corvus, I agree with his suicidal devotion to principle. For a moment, genuine surprise crossed Corvus's perfect features. Then he laughed, rich and cold and utterly without mercy. What a waste. You could have been magnificent, little bird. Instead, you'll be dead before sunrise. He gestured to his vampires. Take them. Kill Ashmore. Bring the girl to me alive. I want to show her exactly what her choice has cost. The vampires surged forward as one. Theron moved with the deadly grace of someone who'd accepted death and decided to make it expensive. He pushed Alara toward the fissure in the wall, even as his blade found the throat of the nearest attacker. Run. Get to the river. Not without you. She grabbed his arm, refusing to be pushed aside. Alara, please. A vampire lunged for her. She ducked, rolled, came up with her knife extended. The blade caught him across the face, not a killing blow, but enough to make him stumble. Theron was there instantly, his sword punching through the vampire's heart. Two more replaced the fallen one. They were going to die here. Both of them, overwhelmed by numbers and ancient power. But through the bond, Alara felt Theron's grim satisfaction. If death was inevitable, at least it would be on his terms, standing for something that mattered. She could accept that ending. Then the impossible happened. A voice rang out from the fissure behind them, female, young, carrying an authority that made even Corvus's vampires hesitate. By the laws of the First Accord, I claim sanctuary rights for Theron Ashmore and his blood-marked companion. A figure emerged from the narrow opening, a vampire, clearly, with that telltale supernatural grace, but young, barely looking 20, with copper hair and fierce green eyes. She wore traveling clothes and carried herself with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how dangerous she was. Corvus's eyes narrowed. Celeste, I should have known you'd involve yourself. This doesn't concern you. It concerns every vampire who values the old laws over your new tyranny. Celeste shot back. She moved to stand beside Theron, and Alara saw recognition flash between them. The freed bride and her liberator, reunited after 30 years. The First Accord grants sanctuary to any vampire who seeks refuge with a willing host. I offer Theron and Alara sanctuary in Haven territory. You cannot touch them without declaring war on every vampire who's sworn to Haven's protection. Haven is neutral ground. It doesn't involve itself in house politics. It does when those politics threaten the Accords themselves. Celeste's voice hardened. You've broken the laws, Corvus. Hunting without just cause. Threatening to turn mortals against their will. Using blood thralls as political tools. The Haven Council has been watching. This ends now, or we take this matter before the Grand Assembly, and let all the houses judge your actions. Silence fell like a blade. Corvus stood utterly still, calculation racing behind his eyes. The Grand Assembly hadn't convened in a century. Calling one now would mean exposing his methods to scrutiny. Defending his expansion before vampires who might not approve of his tactics. Political suicide. Even if he won the argument, you're bluffing, he said finally. Haven doesn't have the influence to call an assembly. Try me. Celeste smiled, sharp and fearless. I didn't spend 30 years building alliances just to watch you destroy the vampire who gave me freedom. Push this further, and you'll find out exactly how much influence I've accumulated. The standoff stretched taut. Corvus's vampires waited for orders, but their leader remained frozen, weighing his options. Finally, he stepped back. This isn't over, Ashmore. Sanctuary only lasts as long as you remain in Haven territory. The moment you set foot outside their protection, I know the laws, Theron said quietly. Better than you, apparently. Corvus's expression promised retribution, but he gestured to his vampires. Withdraw. Let the cowards run to their sanctuary. We have time. The war party melted back into shadows, Corvus the last to leave. He paused at the chamber entrance, looking back at Alara one final time. Enjoy your mortality while it lasts, little bird. I suspect it will be quite brief. Then he was gone, and the catacombs fell silent, except for the rushing water beyond the fissure. Alara's legs gave out for the second time that night. Theron caught her, and Celeste moved to support her other side, the three of them standing together in the flickering torchlight. Thank you, Theron said hoarsely to Celeste. I don't know how you found us, but blood calls to blood, Celeste said simply. You freed me, taught me to shield my thoughts, but I never completely severed our connection. When I felt you in mortal danger, I came. Her eyes shifted to Alara, warm with curiosity. And you must be the mortal brave enough to take his blood mark, Alara. She managed a shaky smile. And I'm not brave. I'm just stubborn. Stubbornness is its own form of courage. Celeste looked between them, seeing the bond that hummed in the space they shared. Haven awaits, if you'll accept sanctuary. It's not perfect. We have our own politics, our own problems. But it's safe, free, no houses dictating who you must serve or how you must live. Theron looked at Alara, the question clear in his eyes. She thought about what Haven represented: exile, yes, but also possibility. A place where she could learn what it meant to be free, to make choices without cages or constraints. Where Theron could be something other than a fugitive or a failed house lord, where they could discover what they might become together. Without blood oaths or time limits forcing their hands. 26 days, she said softly. That's how long the bond lasts. Yes. Theron's hand found hers, cold fingers intertwining with warm. And then you're free to choose: stay in Haven, return to the mortal world, go wherever you wish. No obligations, no debts. Alara smiled, thinking of everything they'd survived in just 3 days. The arrow and the rescue, the sanctuary burning, the feeding that had shown her his soul, the choice between survival and principle. Ask me again in 26 days, she said. I suspect my answer might surprise you. Through the bond, she felt his hope flare bright and fierce, the hope that perhaps she'd choose to stay. That perhaps mortality and immortality could find common ground. That perhaps they'd both finally found something worth more than survival: freedom, partnership, trust earned rather than demanded. Come, Celeste said, already moving toward the fissure. Dawn is close, and we have a long journey to Haven. I'll explain the territory laws on the way. And you can tell me how you managed to make Lord Corvus retreat without a single death. They followed her into darkness and rushing water, leaving the catacombs and its ghosts behind. Above them, in the ruined monastery, ash settled where vampires had fallen. Corvus's war party retreated into the forest, carrying news of failure and unexpected resistance. And in the east, dawn broke over mountains that had witnessed centuries of vampire wars and blood oaths and impossible choices. Alara walked between two vampires toward a place called Haven, her hand clasped in Theron's, her future entirely her own. For the first time in her life, the bond hummed between them, not possession, but promise. 26 days to decide what came next. She suspected it would be enough, the end.